The Yu state constructed a citadel in Yuhatai in 472 BCE during the Warring States Zhongguo 475 to 221 BCE, which is when Nanjing's recorded history begins. After the Chu state's takeover of the Yu kingdom, another fortress named Jinling was built on Qingliang Hill to manage the Yangtze and Xinhui rivers' transportation. Nanjing was consecutively under the administration of Moling and Danyang districts throughout the Qin dynasty 221 to 206 BCE and Han dynasty 206 BCE to 220 CE dynasties. There have been atrocities throughout the annals of battles that have shook the nation, and the Nanking slaughter taught us the dangers of conflict. Relations have been rising since first conflict in 1894, which was fought initially for sovereignty of Korea and subsequently for the raised dualism of forces. With the invasion of Nanking came a bloodbath that wiped out everything within path, either civilian or army. That is to state, the goal of this conflict was to destroy any human who stood in the way. This war dramatically altered Japan-China ties, as well as leaving an ongoing dispute on the battle's consequences. Aside from power stations, water treatment plants, and radio channels, the central clinic, which had a red cross on its roof, was one of the blasted targets. In 1937, Nanjing was defeated. Up to 300,000 people were slaughtered after the city was sacked. The city was ruled by puppet authorities after Japan's defeat in 1945. From 1946 until 1949, Nanjing was the capital of Chiang Kai administration. But Chinese Communist armies took the city in 1949. After the People's Republic of China was founded on October 1, 1949, Nanjing was once again abandoned in favor of Beijing as the national capital. In 1952, it was designated as Jiangsu's provincial capital, and it has since grown into a sophisticated industrialized city. Anything that can maintain this region is evidently destroyed in order to complete the assault successfully. By turning Imperial Japan into a desert, the Chinese people was tormented, molested, abducted, and slaughtered, losing their dignity or even portion of their history. The evacuation from the region was uneven, jeopardizing the lives of hundreds of thousands of impoverished individuals who were unable to flee as quickly as the wealthy. It is naive to imagine a war with a higher proportion of civilian losses than military casualties. The cost of killing helpless people is incalculable. There were also persons that were not native to the area when these activities were planned. Nanking was the capital of many dynasties throughout China between the 6th and 15th century. Nanking was the capital of China until 1949. When the capital of China was changed to Beijing, Nanking lies along the Yangtze River Hongwu. An Ming Dynasty emperor constructed the largest city walls in the world around Nanking for military defense. Nanking was an astonishingly beautiful city with enormous towers, many pagodas, temples, and many museums, monuments to right. We can see some Nanking's structural accomplishments. The first image shows an aerial view of the wall of Nanking in 1930. The next image shows an illustration of the porcelain tower of Nanking. This pagoda was built in the start of the 15th century by the Ming Dynasty and was destroyed in the 19th century. This pagoda was said to be the most beautiful in all of China and is even considered one of the 7 wonders of the medieval world.
What role did the Japanese culture play in provoking the genocide? Japanese culture played an important role in the rape of Nanking. They viewed their emperor as their national symbol and as a god. And even before the war, Japanese lords were at constant war and competition with each others. Besides, the samurai's code of conduct, which was called Way of the Warrior, had also influenced the Japanese culture and society. For the samurai, dying and killing for their emperor was the highest honor they could achieve. One of the famous example of Japanese soldiers' willingness to die for their emperor was that kamikaze suicide missions. The Japanese soldiers crashed their planes at Pearl Harbor and were committed to die for their country and emperor. Besides, the Japanese also felt that the entire Asia should belong to them and saw themselves as superiors. China was Japan's main target for imperial expansion. They began to take action before China became too powerful. To expand their nation and conquer more territories, they staged an explosion to derail the cars owned by them to declare war against China. Although their mission failed and killed Chinese guards, they still used the incident to justify the invasion. Were the Japanese ever held accountable for their actions in Nanking? The Japanese soldiers massacred between 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians in Nanking in just 6 weeks and raped 20,000 to 80,000 women as well. According to an American doctor, Dr. Wilson, much of the time the elderly and infants were the targets of executions. Any men who were old enough or fit enough to be soldiers were executed. This forgotten Holocaust went unnoticed for decades by the Westerners and the world until Iris Chong, a Chinese author, wrote her book, The Rape of Nanking. It was only then that the Westerners and Asians started recognizing the massacre, and it was brought to light. However, to this day, the Japanese government still hasn't recognized the massacre or apologized to the people of Nanking and claims that China is exaggerating the number of victims. So, they never were held accountable for their crimes. What role did the foreigners play in Nanking during Japanese control of the city?
一直在这个哭，这么多人一起死光了，没有人了，自己想想非常难过，非常痛苦的，那怎么办？到6个星期，当时后来我舅舅就把我们姊妹2个人一同到了这个安宁区。那个时候有三个外国人，一个是美国，一个是德国，一个是英国。这三个外国人，你要报告你才有的吃，你不报告，你去的人没得吃。那时候人太多了，一个人挖一窑子煮，一个人舀一窑子煮。后来到6个星期以后呢，就是安宁区的负责人就讲了，他说你们现在可以回家去看一下。他说日本人不杀，你们都可以回家了。后来我就是好多人，好几十个人一直回来的，一家一家的都没得人了，一家一家的没得人了，都哭死的了，到处都哭。马基他是朝鲜的，德国那边呢他是几日籍的，所以跟他们2个人以后呢，就上我家去。但是一下过待了以后，我就到我家了。到我家，满地都是死人，那时候满地都是死人，到底都是死人。我希望我们人们不要忘记这一段历史，要反对战争，要珍爱和平。一直在这个哭。
Japan's reason for power. Japan had just come out of its period of depression in the mid-1930s. Many soldiers who were heavily affected left their villages and joined the army. The country did not have many natural resources and traded for raw materials they lacked. Japan taxed highly on goods to boost their economy and limit imports of America and Europe. In 1931, the Manchurian Incident, Japan invaded and took control of Manchuria. Tanaka Memorial is an alleged Japanese document from 1927 of a plan listing the 5 steps to achieve Japan's conquest, taking over Manchuria being the first step. From 1937, total war was declared between Japan and China. During the time, the government used propaganda, media, and school education to influence the public's opinions. Invasion of China. Japan felt sure their soldiers would fight and sacrifice for their country, unlike the weaker US and European militaries. They underestimated their enemies and went into it with these stereotypes. In 1937, Japan began a full-scale invasion of China. In Shanghai, August 13, occurred one of the largest and deadliest battles. Leader Chiang Kai-shek took over as commander from Zhang Zhizhong. He ordered thousands of Chinese troops to defend Shanghai. Japan fought aggressively with firepower and bombs. Japan surrounded their land and used artillery to strike their towns to ruins. The Japanese demanded the Chinese withdraw troops from the area of the city before invading and killing those in hiding. This set off the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Chiang wanted to keep as much military presence there and the possibility that Western powers would intervene. After 3 months of fighting, China had to retreat from Shanghai. Outcome of Nanking. At Nanking, 1937, hundreds of thousands of people, both soldiers and civilians, were murdered. In addition, the military also committed mass rape, arson, and ravaged their homes. Beginning in August, the Japanese army started aerial attacks on China's capital city of Nanjing. Thousands evacuated and fled while the sick and elderly were left behind. Due to the result of many refugees and poor, the safety zone was formed, a neutral zone in Nanjing to protect civilians. Looking to find Chinese soldiers, Japanese forces entered the zone often and rounded up men, including some soldiers but mostly innocent civilians. The massacre was justified by the idea that Japan had to educate the Chinese and reform China in order to create a greater nation.
According to the International Military Tribunal for the Far East and its findings, the estimated death toll in Nanjing was at least 200,000 casualties and at least 20,000 cases of rape. The massacre is generally described as having occurred over a 6-week period after the fall of Nanjing, but the atrocities committed were said to have happened even as the Japanese army took over Shanghai and wildly advanced toward Nanjing. Officers were encouraged to kill as many Chinese as possible, like a competition, which included rape, beheadings, mass murder, arson, looting. Not only men were slaughtered, women and children were tortured, humiliated, and raped by Japanese soldiers. Here is a heartbreaking testimony from a survivor.
但是就在一个年头还没想透的时候，那个日本兵冲进来了，冲进几个人兵，前面那个我就看了3个，挎着大刀，端着枪进来了。他一看到了我，已经砰开枪，一枪前面人打倒下来了，这打倒下来就慌了，啊，叫起来了。我母亲抱着我的挺小的弟弟，小弟弟拼命的哭，妈妈就给他起来，叫他不要哭。就在这个时候，那个日本鬼子扎了刺刀，一刺刀刺到我母亲就把我母亲倒下来了，倒下来小孩掉了要快掉到地下来了，母亲还趁着进去的，弟弟抱他没给他掉下去。鬼子把这个刺刀拔出去以后，又一刺刀刺到我母亲倒脚还倒下来，把我弟弟摔在地下了，我弟弟丢在地下。弟弟我们就哭喊哦，不要抽妈妈，不要抽妈妈。这个时候呢，我那个顶小的弟弟不是给鬼子抽的掉地下了嘛？有个鬼子小弟弟在底下哭了，那个鬼子把我那2个弟弟抽倒了以后，看那小孩在哭，在我弟弟屁股高头一刺刀， 一跳，我走到前头，看到我妈妈睡在那，睡个头抢到那个竹子片，看睡了看，睡了看了，我一看到我妈妈睡了看，我妈妈没死呢，看到我看到我妈妈，两个眼睛对我看我的妈妈你怎么样？我的妈妈也看到我眼睛直掉，妈不能讲话，看到嘴里动动讲不出来。我那边有个小孩哭的声音，好像是我弟弟。我明白妈妈意思了，我说妈妈，我去看一下啊，是不是小爸爸我那个顶下的弟子？叫爸爸，我就走了，走了去找底下全是死人，底下全是血，那个底下挖的血，踩的就在那发黏了，那个天特别冷。绕前头一堆死人，几个堆了块，几个堆了块，中间一个窿大，一个小孩趴在那块，向他草上爬。那是我弟弟，哇哭，喊妈妈哭，我弟弟还没死。我开了以后我就喊，我说小宝，他听到我的喉咙中扑通掉过来了，拼命的朝我前面，朝我这个跟前窜，但是因为天又冷。小鞋子也跑掉了，两个小脚袜子也没有了，小脚冻得通红，全是血。这时候妈妈看了我小弟弟放下来以后，妈妈拼命的挣扎，把手撑起来，把衣服拽怀里面的衣服，把绫子盖回来，拼命的拽回来，给我弟弟起来。叫我弟弟呢，看到我妈妈把衣服拽下来以后，拼命跑到妈妈怀里给他起来。我妈妈把衣服拽过来以后，我看了几个刀伤，都在流血。我弟弟再起来，靠母亲来这边那一个刀伤里头还冒血泡泡。我弟弟不懂事，拼命再起来，血泡泡动，我就赶快上去。我妈妈，我给你捂的。我说你坚持一会儿，会好的。妈妈，我听你捂的。可是我妈妈不能讲话，眼泪直掉，掉了，头一倒过去了，倒过去就眼睛也不接声。我晓得下我妈妈可能死了，我摇她，她也不响。我喊她妈妈你起来，她也不起来。我怎么喊他，他也不睬。我就是想他妈妈死了，我说怎么办呢
？The Japanese glorified the soldiers that were at the Battle of Shanghai and Nanjing. Many Japanese still to this day deny the massacre and rape in Nanjing even existed. Many Japanese military leaders were not even tried of war crimes and were allowed to resume their normal civilian lives. Even in present-day Japan, the shrines of the quote-unquote war heroes of Nanjing are visited and paid tribute by the Japanese, outraging the Chinese. These crimes need to be exposed and acknowledged by the Japanese. Glorification of this time and brutal warfare needs to be put to an end so the people that were impacted can heal from the damages done. This is why there is continued tension between Japan, China, and even Korea, too.